The evening sun sank low behind the endless line of pines, its golden light melting into the dust that hung over the quiet trail. The air smelled of rain and old wood, and somewhere far off, a coyote cried into the emptiness of the coming night. A man rode slowly down that narrow dirt road, his shadow long and tired against the ground. His hat brim dipped low, hiding most of his face, but the weariness in his posture spoke louder than words ever could. His horse moved at an easy pace, hooves muffled by the soft soil, as if even it understood the weight that its rider carried. The man was known by many names across the small towns scattered through the valley. Some called him a doctor, others a wanderer, a savior, or even a ghost who appeared when death came too close. He had saved lives more times than anyone could count, patching up gunshot wounds, pulling fever from children, and delivering babies in broken cabins where prayers often failed. Yet, as he passed through the small town of Red River that night, people whispered quietly from behind wooden doors, unsure whether to thank him or fear him. He never stayed long enough to explain himself, never long enough to be understood. He rode until the first lantern lights flickered through the windows of the small settlement. Red River was a town that had once been full of promisor mills, humming, wagons lined up by the riverbank, laughter echoing from the saloon. Now, most of it stood half empty, the laughter replaced by silence and the smell of old smoke. He stopped by the well, climbed down from his horse, and brushed the dust from his coat. His hands were rough and scarred, not just from work, but from the things he had done in the name of saving others. A small voice broke the silence. "Why are your eyes sad if you've saved so many?" He turned slowly. A little girl stood a few feet away, holding a wooden doll with one arm broken. Her dress was faded, patched at the seams, and her hair was tied in a loose braid that had come undone. Her eyes, bright and curious, didn't look afraid of him like the others. She watched him with the kind of honesty only a child could have. He didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air, heavier than the clouds that gathered above the valley. He looked down at the bucket of water in his hands, watching his reflection ripple in the surface. "Sometimes," he said softly, "saving a life doesn't mean you save a soul." The girl tilted her head. "What does that mean?" Before he could respond, the sharp sound of a closing door echoed down the street. The saloon's lantern flickered, and an old man stepped out, wiping his hands on a cloth. He stared at the traveler for a long time before nodding slightly. "You'd best come inside," he said. "Storm's coming." The man looked back at the sky. The air had turned colder, and the first drops of rain touched the brim of his hat. He nodded once and led his horse toward the stable. The little girl followed quietly, still clutching her doll, still curious about the stranger with the tired eyes. Inside the saloon, the air was warm and filled with the faint smell of whiskey and firewood. A few townsfolk sat in silence, pretending not to notice when the traveler entered. The piano in the corner stood untouched, covered in dust, as if no one had dared play it in months. He sat by the fire, stretching his hands toward the heat. The old man, who turned out to be the saloon keeper, poured him a cup of black coffee. "Haven't seen you since the fire up north," he said quietly. The traveler nodded. "Not much left up there." "Not much left anywhere," the old man replied. "You still doing God's work?" He gave a tired half smile. "Depends on whose God you're asking." The girl had slipped inside too, sitting near the door, watching the flames dance across his face. She noticed the scars along his jawline, the faint marks on his hands, and the way he looked at the fire as if it held memories he couldn't escape. After a while, she asked again, "If you can help people, why does it hurt you so much?" The saloon fell silent. Even the old man paused, his hand frozen on the counter. The traveler didn't look up. "Because every life I save reminds me of one I couldn't," he said quietly. "And there are too many of those." The rain began to beat harder against the roof, the sound growing steady and deep. Lightning flashed outside, and for a brief moment, his face was fully lit. The girl saw something in his eyes of sorrow that didn't belong to one man alone but seemed to come from years of loss. Choices made too late, and battles fought without victory. She didn't understand it completely, but she felt it. He stood after a while and walked to the window. Beyond the streaks of rain, the road leading into town was nearly swallowed by darkness. Yet something about the way he stared into that darkness made it seem like he was waiting for someone or something to arrive. The old man noticed it too. "You expecting trouble?" he asked. "Trouble doesn't wait for an invitation," he said. "It just follows." The girl hugged her doll tighter. "Are you running from bad people?" He glanced down at her, his eyes softening for the first time. "No," he said. "I'm running from what good people sometimes become." The storm outside grew wilder, wind howling through the cracks in the saloon walls. The lanterns flickered, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Somewhere far away, a horse neighed in panic. The old man went to check the doors, muttering something about the wind, but the traveler didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the darkness beyond the window. Suddenly, the door creaked open with a loud groan, and a cold gust swept through the room. Everyone turned. The figure in the doorway was drenched from the rain, their coat dripping water onto the floorboards. The room went still as the stranger stepped in. The traveler's hand instinctively moved toward the inside of his coat, where something heavy rested, a revolver, worn but ready. The drenched stranger looked at him with a face pale and familiar. "I finally found you," the newcomer said, voice trembling with a mix of anger and relief. The little girl looked from one to the other, sensing the weight of something too big for her to understand. The traveler didn't move or speak, but his jaw tightened. The sound of rain seemed to fade as silence took hold. The old man broke it first. "You two know each other?" Neither answered. The traveler slowly lowered his hand, but his eyes stayed locked on the newcomers. The girl could feel the air shift like the moment before lightning struck. The stranger stepped closer, boots echoing across the wooden floor. "You can't keep running," they said. "Not after what you did." The traveler's expression didn't change, but there was a quiet ache behind his calm. "Some things you don't run from," he said softly. "You just carry them." The wind outside roared louder, shaking the windows. The little girl clutched her doll and looked between them, unsure if she should stay or flee. The old man stood behind the counter, frozen in place, eyes darting between the two figures at the center of the room. The traveler finally took a step forward, his shadow stretching toward the stranger as thunder rolled above them. "Then tell me," he said, his voice steady, almost wary, "how much more must I carry before it ends?" The answer didn't come. The lightning flashed again, illuminating both faces in stark light, the savior and the accuser, standing inches apart as the storm raged around them. The girl's question still lingered in the air, unanswered and haunting. Why were his eyes so sad if he had saved so many? Outside, the wind tore through the valley, and the night swallowed the sound of their silence. Somewhere between the thunder and the rain, the truth waited, heavy and untold. The wind howled outside the saloon, rattling the windows and shaking loose the old shutters that had held on through 100 storms. The lamp flame trembled, throwing uneven light across the room where the two strangers stood facing each other. Neither spoke. The rain dripping from the newcomer's coat made small dark pools on the wooden floor, each drop breaking the silence like a heartbeat. The little girl stayed near the counter, eyes wide, her doll clutched to her chest. The old man behind the bar didn't move, as if the smallest sound might tip the balance between calm and danger. Finally, the traveler broke the silence. "You came a long way," he said quietly, his voice steady but tired. "I had to," the stranger replied, their tone sharp with something like grief. "You left me no choice." The traveler's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away, only turned slightly toward the fire, letting its glow trace across his worn face. The girl could see his eyes clearly now, and though he looked strong, there was a sadness deep in them, the kind that didn't fade with time. The stranger took another step closer. "After what you did in Clearwater, did you really think you could just disappear?" The name hit the room like a cold wind. The old man flinched, glancing nervously between them. "Clearwater," he said under his breath. "That place burned years ago." The traveler said nothing, only stared into the fire. His silence said more than words could. The girl didn't understand what Clearwater was, but she could feel its weight in the air. The stranger looked like someone torn between revenge and regret. "You left them there," they said, voice shaking. "You left everyone behind." "I stayed as long as I could," the traveler answered finally. His tone was low, almost breaking. "When the fire spread to the east ridge, I couldn't save them all." The stranger's hand trembled as they brushed wet hair from their face. "You saved yourself." The old man took a slow breath, trying to steady the air that had grown thick with anger and memory. "You folks should talk this through somewhere else," he muttered, but neither listened. The girl stepped closer, drawn by something she didn't fully understand, her small face filled with confusion and sympathy. "What happened in Clearwater?" she asked softly. The traveler looked at her, then back at the stranger. His voice came slow, like someone walking through a field of broken glass. "It was a small town," he said. "Quiet, good people. I went there to help when the fever broke out. It spread fast, families dying in their sleep. I worked day and night trying to keep them alive." The girl blinked. "You were a doctor." "I was," he said. "Maybe I still am, though I don't much feel like one anymore." The stranger let out a harsh breath. "You should tell her the rest. Tell her what happened after the fever." He didn't look up. The fire crackled between them, the only sound for a long time. Then his words came slow and heavy. "The town burned. Nobody knows how it started. Some said lightning, others said it was the fever wards catching fire. I was there when the flames took the last house. I tried to pull people out, but there were too many." He stopped, his voice fading into the storm outside. "Some I couldn't reach in time." The stranger's eyes burned. "You didn't just lose them, you led them there. You told them to stay put. You told them you'd come back." He turned sharply then, meeting their gaze. "If I hadn't, more would have died running into the woods." The smoke was thick and the wind turned. They had no chance either way. The room grew still again. The girl didn't know who was right, but she could feel the pain between them, two people bound by something they both wished had never happened. The old man poured himself a small drink, his hand shaking slightly. "Clearwater," he muttered again, almost to himself. "That fire took more than houses. It took faith." The stranger's voice softened, the anger slowly folding into sorrow. "You still think saving a few makes up for the rest?" "No," the traveler said quietly. "Nothing makes up for it. You just keep moving because stopping hurts worse." The wind outside began to die down, the rain easing to a slow drizzle. The little girl, still hugging her doll, walked closer until she stood beside him. "Did you know them?" she asked the stranger, her voice small. The stranger hesitated before nodding. "My brother was one of the people he promised to save." The traveler closed his eyes. The firelight flickered against the deep lines in his face. When he opened them again, there was no defense left, only truth. "Your brother stayed behind to help me carry the sick. He didn't make it out." The words hung there, raw and final. The stranger's shoulders shook slightly, the fight in them giving way to grief. "You should have told me," they whispered. "All these years, I thought you ran." "I did," he said. "After it was over, I ran because I couldn't face what was left." The saloon was quiet, except for the low crackle of the fire. The girl watched the two adults, trying to understand a kind of loss that felt too big for her world. She looked up at him again, the man with the sad eyes, and something inside her ached for him. "Is that why your eyes look that way?" she asked. He gave her a small, tired smile. "Maybe it is." For a long moment, the silence returned. Then the old man cleared his throat. "Whatever happened back then, it's over now," he said. "Ain't no use stirring ghosts." The traveler shook his head. "Ghosts don't rest just because we stop talking about them." The stranger stepped back, staring at him with something between forgiveness and fury. "So, what now? You keep wandering from town to town, saving strangers until you forget the ones you lost." He looked toward the window again, where the rain had turned into mist. "Forgetting isn't the point," he said. "Remembering is. I just don't know what to do with the remembering." The girl placed her doll on the table beside him. "You can give it to someone else," she said innocently. "If it's too heavy, you can share it." The old man let out a faint chuckle. "Out of the mouths of babes," he murmured. But the traveler didn't smile. His eyes stayed fixed on the stranger, and there was something new in his expression, quiet resolve that hadn't been there before. "You said you found me," he said slowly, "but I think you came for more than answers." The stranger didn't reply right away. They looked down, their hands tightening at their sides. "There's something else," they said finally. "The fire at Clearwater wasn't an accident." The traveler froze. The old man straightened, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I've spent years trying to find the truth," the stranger said, "and I found records letters. Someone ordered that fire." The air turned cold again, sharper than the storm outside. The traveler's hand clenched slowly. "Who?" The stranger met his gaze. "Someone from the company that owned the land. They wanted the towns gone. Said it was easier to start fresh if no one lived there." The old man swore under his breath. "Good Lord," he muttered. The traveler's voice went low, steady, dangerous in its calm. "You're saying someone burned an entire town to make room for profit?" The stranger nodded. "And they're still out there. The same men, building new towns on ashes they made themselves." The fire cracked, sending a spark onto the floor. The girl stepped back as the two adults stared at each other, the truth hanging between them like a loaded weapon. The traveler's face hardened, all weariness gone now. "If that's true," he said, "then running isn't an option anymore." The old man shook his head. "You're not thinking of going after them. That's suicide." The traveler reached for his coat, pulling it over his shoulders. "They started something long ago," he said. "It's time someone finished it." The stranger watched him, torn between warning and trust. "You really think one man can fight them?" He looked at her then, his voice soft but unyielding. "I'm not trying to fight them. I'm trying to stop them from doing it again." The girl picked up her doll and whispered, "You'll come back, right?" He knelt beside her, meeting her gaze. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'll try." Outside, the wind began to rise again, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. The stranger followed him to the door, hesitation flickering in their eyes. "If you go after them," they said quietly, "you won't be the only one." He nodded once, tipping his hat. "Then we'll go together." The door swung open, letting in the cold night air. The firelight flickered against the rain as they stepped out into the storm, two shadows disappearing into the road that wound through the valley. The old man watched from the doorway, shaking his head. "Fools chasing ghosts," he muttered. The little girl stood beside him, still holding her doll. "Maybe," she said softly, "but some ghosts deserve to be chased." And as the storms swallowed their silhouettes, the night grew quiet once more, leaving behind only the echo of footsteps and the promise of truth waiting in the dark. The rain had stopped by morning, but the air still held the smell of wet soil and pine. The traveler rode ahead, his coat dark with dampness, while the stranger followed a few paces behind, guiding their horse through the soft earth. The road curved through the valley and disappeared into the hills that once led to Clearwater. Neither spoke much, though both carried thoughts that refused to rest. The sun was weak behind the clouds, giving the world a grey stillness, as if even the land mourned what had been lost. The traveller's mind wandered back to the faces he could still remember from Clearwater. The old woman who sang while he treated her fever, the boy who brought him water from the well, the church bell that rang until the tower collapsed in the fire. Those sounds stayed with him, haunting his sleep, creeping into his thoughts whenever silence fell too deep. He had always believed his duty was to save whoever he could, but now he wondered if that belief had blinded him to the truth. Maybe saving people wasn't enough when the world itself was being bought, burned, and rebuilt by greed. Behind him, the stranger rode with steady eyes, watching him carefully. For years, they had hated this man, blamed him for everything that had gone wrong. But now that the truth had begun to show itself, anger wasn't enough. There was something about him that didn't match the stories. He wasn't cruel or careless. He carried guilt like it was a living thing. And though the stranger didn't want to admit it, part of them began to understand the kind of loneliness he must have known all those years. By noon, they reached a small settlement near the river. It wasn't much more than a few cabins, a trading post, and a blacksmith's shed. Smoke rose from a chimney, carrying the smell of fresh bread. The traveller tied his horse outside and stepped toward the post, the stranger close behind. The man behind the counter looked up from counting supplies and gave a faint smile. "Haven't seen faces from the road in a while," he said. "You folks passing through or staying?" "Passing through," the traveller replied. "We're looking for someone." "Lots of someone's been through here lately," the shopkeeper said, his tone changing slightly. "Surveyors, mostly. Big companies setting up new lines by the ridge, building roads and laying markers. Folks say they'll bring work, but they bring trouble first." The traveller and the stranger exchanged a look. "What company?" he asked. "Can't recall the name," the man said, rubbing his beard. "Something with iron in it. They've been offering coin for anyone willing to move out of the valley. Some took it, most didn't." The stranger frowned. "And the ones who didn't?" The shopkeeper's smile faded. "Some of them went missing. Maybe left in the night. Maybe didn't." The traveller thanked him quietly, bought a small bag of grain for the horses, and stepped outside. The stranger followed, pulling their coat tight. "They're doing it again," they said. "The same thing they did to Clearwater." He nodded slowly. "And this time, we're not walking away." They set out again, following the river upstream where the trees grew thicker and the air colder. The ground turned rocky, the path steeper. Every few miles, they saw signs of the company's present stakes driven into the soil, paint marks on trees, bits of metal and rope left behind. The traveler stopped near one of the markers, crouched down and brushed away the dirt around it. A black stamp showed faintly on the iron plate. Red Iron Company. He stared at the name for a long moment. They were behind it all along, he murmured. The stranger knelt beside him. You knew the name. I heard it once, he said. Years ago, when I first came west, they built mills and rail lines, bought towns, broke them down, and sold the pieces. Clearwater was one of their early failures, but I thought they were gone. Seems they're not, the stranger replied. As the day wore on, the sound of hammers echoed faintly through the valley. They followed it until they reached a ridge overlooking a wide clearing. Below, dozens of men worked among piles of timber and stone, building something large. Smoke rose from the campfires, and wagons moved back and forth. In the center stood a white tent with the red iron emblem painted across it. The stranger's grip tightened on the reins. That's them. The traveler's eyes narrowed. We'll wait until dark. They found shelter beneath a cluster of trees overlooking the site. As night fell, the camp below turned into a scatter of moving lanterns and shadows. The traveler watched silently, every flicker of light reflecting in his eyes. The stranger sat beside him, their voice quiet. What's the plan? He didn't answer right away. First, we find out who's running it. Then, we find proof of what they did. And after that, he turned to her. Then we make sure they can't do it again. She stared at him for a moment. You really think you can stop them? He gave a faint smile. I don't think anything. I just know I have to try. Hours passed before the camp settled. The travelers moved quietly down the slope, sticking to the shadows. The guards near the tents were half asleep, their rifles leaning against the posts. The traveler motioned for silence, then slipped inside the largest tent. Inside, a small desk stood covered with papers, maps, and ledgers. A lamp burned low, throwing a dim glow across the ink-stained pages. The stranger picked up a map. It showed the valley, divided into sections marked with red lines and numbers. Each section had small notes acquire, burned, cleared. The traveler found a folder labeled Clearwater Project. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were letters dated 10 years ago. The company had ordered the evacuation of the town under false pretenses, citing contamination from the fever. When people refused to leave, they had burned the area to reclaim the land for mining rights. He closed the folder slowly, his eyes darkening. They wrote it down, he said quietly. They kept records like it was business. The stranger's voice shook. So now we have proof. Proof won't stop them, he said, but it's a start. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside. The traveler grabbed the papers, stuffed them into his coat, and motioned for the stranger to follow. They slipped out the back just as 2 guards entered the tent. The sound of shouting rose behind them. Lanterns flared to life, spreading light through the camp. They ran into the trees, branches whipping against their faces. The traveler's horse neighed somewhere ahead, spooked by the noise. Shots rang out, bullets slicing through the air. The stranger stumbled, but he caught her arm and pulled her onward until they reached the ridge again. They mounted quickly, and the horses burst into a gallop down the narrow trail. The night swallowed them as they rode hard through the forest. The sound of pursuit faded behind them, replaced by the pounding of hooves and the rush of the river nearby. The stranger clung to her saddle, breathless but alive. They'll come after us, she said. They already are, he replied, but now they know someone's watching. By dawn, They reached an abandoned cabin near the old bridge. The roof sagged, and the windows were covered in dust, but it would do for shelter. Inside, they spread the papers across the table, studying them under the weak morning light. "There are more towns marked," the stranger said, tracing the red lines on the map. "Not just Clearwater, all across the valley." The traveler nodded grimly. They planned to clear the entire stretch, every village, every home, all for the iron beneath. The wind outside picked up again, whistling through the cracks in the walls. The stranger looked at him. "You can't take them on alone." "I won't," he said. "There are people out there who've lost everything because of them. They just need a reason to fight, and you think you can lead them." He looked down at the papers, at the map of the valley he once thought he knew. "No," he said softly. "I don't lead. I help people stand." The stranger watched him, the same man she had once blamed for her brother's death, now standing before her as the only one willing to face the same danger again. Something in her heart shifted. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a single moment, but a choice made in the middle of fear. Outside, thunder rolled far off, echoing through the mountains. The traveler folded the map carefully and tucked it into his coat. "We'll need to move before they track us here," he said. "We'll find the others, those who still remember Clearwater." The stranger nodded. "And if they don't want to remember, then we remind them what happens when silence wins," he said. The morning light broke through the clouds, spilling across the valley below. Smoke still rose from the red iron camp in the distance, dark against the pale sky. The traveler stood in the doorway, his shadow long across the floor. Somewhere behind that smoke was the truth they had both been running from Mand now. It was coming for them both. The wind moved restless through the trees that morning, whispering through the branches like voices from a forgotten time. The traveler stood outside the cabin, tightening the straps on his horse's saddle, while the stranger packed the papers and maps they had taken from the red iron camp. The light was grey, and the air had a sharp edge to it, the kind that made a person's breath visible. The valley below was quiet, too quiet, as if it was holding its breath before something broke loose. The traveler glanced toward the ridge. Smoke still drifted faintly in the distance, though the fires in the company's camp had died down. He knew they would be looking for them soon, maybe already were. The proof they carried wasn't just dangerous, it was the kind of truth that could tear the false peace of the valley apart. He climbed into the saddle, his jaw set, the weight of what they had seen pressing down on him like the sky before a storm. They rode toward the river trail, cutting through the thick woods where the fog hung low. Every sound seemed sharper now, the crack of branches, the splash of hooves in shallow water, the call of a hawk overhead. The stranger rode close, scanning the trees. "They'll come after us," she said. "We should have burned the papers. Then they'd win," he said without turning. "We can't fight what's hidden by hiding it too." They followed the winding trail until it opened to a clearing where the ruins of old cabins lay in silence. It had once been a small settlement, long abandoned, its roofs caved in and fences turned to rot. The traveler stopped there, dismounting slowly. "We'll rest the horses," he said. The stranger nodded, though her eyes kept moving. "This place feels wrong," she whispered. "It's memory," he said quietly. "Places remember what people forget." Inside one of the broken cabins, they found an old table and a dry patch of floor where they spread the maps again. The red markings across the valley looked more sinister in the dim light. There were towns marked for evacuation, others for acquisition. At the very bottom corner of the map, in faded ink, the traveler noticed something new. Phase 3, Red River. He froze. "They're coming for the town," he said. The stranger leaned over his shoulder. Red River, The one we left. He nodded. They must think the valley's cleared enough to move on it next. They'll burn it too, she said softly. He looked at her, his expression grim. Not if we get there first. They packed everything again, but before they could mount their horses, a low whistle cut through the woods. The sound came from somewhere near the ridge, followed by another, closer this time. The travelers' eyes narrowed. They found us. The stranger's hand went to the small pistol at her belt. How many? He listened for a moment. More than a few. The forest came alive with movement. Voices shouted from the trees, and the glint of rifles flashed through the fog. The traveler motioned for her to move. Ride east, he said. Cross the creek and head for Red River, and you. I'll slow them down. I'm not leaving you behind. He looked at her sharply. This isn't a choice. You have the proof. Get it to the town. She hesitated, but the urgency in his tone left no room for argument. She swung onto her horse and rode into the trees as the first shot cracked through the air. Bark splintered near the traveler's shoulder. He drew his revolver, firing once toward the flash of movement in the distance. The sound echoed through the woods, birds scattering into the grey sky. He moved fast, cutting between trees, using the fog as cover. The men chasing him wore the same black coats with the red iron insignia sewn into the sleeves. They weren't soldiers, but they were trained well enough. He counted at least 6 by the sound of their steps. He led them down the slope, keeping their attention away from the river path where the stranger had gone. For nearly an hour, the forest turned into a quiet war of shadows and echoes. The traveler fired when he had to, disappeared when he could, each movement calculated and quiet. But the numbers worked against him. When he finally reached the ridge above the river, a bullet grazed his arm, spinning him backward. He hit the ground hard, pain flashing through his side. From below, one of the men shouted, "Drop it, Doctor. You've done enough damage already." He recognized the voice. It was the same foreman he had seen years ago when he first came wester. Man named Harlan, the one who had told him Clearwater was under company protection. The traveler struggled to his feet, clutching his arm. "You burned a town full of people," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing, "and you think I'm the one who did the damage." Harlan stepped into view, his coat neat, his hat tilted against the rain that had started again. "We did what we had to. Progress costs something. You, of all people, should understand that. You call murder progress." "I call it survival," Harlan said, "and you should have stayed gone. We had an understanding once." The traveler's hand hovered near his holster. That understanding died in clear water. Before Harlan could answer, thunder rolled above them. The sky opened up again, rain falling in heavy sheets. The traveler took a step back, his boots sinking into the wet soil. "You can stop me," he said, "but others will know. The truth's already on its way." Harlan smirked. "Truth doesn't matter if nobody lives to tell it." Gunfire erupted again, echoing through the trees. The traveler dove behind a fallen log, returning fire as the rain turned the ground to mud. The storm swallowed every sound except the thunder and the shots. His coat was soaked, his breath coming hard, but his focus stayed sharp. Each bullet he fired was measured, not wild. When the last shot faded, the woods went quiet again. He didn't know how many he'd hit, only that Harlan's voice no longer came from the clearing. The traveler moved slowly, keeping low, his revolver still raised. The fog began to thicken again, curling around the trees like smoke. He took one final look toward the ridge before turning back toward the river trail. By the time he reached the crossing, the rain had nearly stopped. The stranger was waiting on the far side, her horse trembling from exhaustion. Relief flashed across her face when she saw him, but it didn't last long. Behind him, faint figures moved through the fog, still coming. "They're not giving up," she said. "They won't," he replied. "Not until they think we're gone." They rode hard again, pushing the horses until the valley opened into the familiar dirt road leading toward Red River. The sun had started to sink behind the hills, casting everything in a deep copper glow. From afar, the town looked peaceful, but the traveler's gut told him it wouldn't stay that way for long. When they reached the outskirts, they went straight to the saloon. The old man was there, wiping down the counter, and a little girl sat near the fire with her doll. Both looked up in surprise when the door burst open. "You came back," the old man said. "Didn't expect that." "There's no time," the traveler said, spreading the papers across the counter. "They're coming for the town." The old man frowned, his eyes scanning the maps. "You sure? They burned Clearwater," the stranger said. "They'll do the same here." The old man's face hardened. "Then we'd better not be sitting ducks." Word spread fast through Red River. By nightfall, men and women gathered in the square, holding lanterns, tools, and hunting rifles. The traveler stood among them, explaining what they had found, his voice low but steady. Some listened with fear, others with anger. The little girl watched from the steps, her wide eyes reflecting the flickering lantern light. "They think this land's theirs to take," the traveler said, "but they're wrong. This land belongs to those who've bled for it, worked it, buried their dead in it." Someone in the crowd asked, "What if they come with guns?" "Then we show them what they forgot," he said, "that this town still has a heart." The night deepened, and the sound of distant thunder rolled again, not from the sky this time, but from the far side of the valley. The earth trembled faintly with the approach of wagons and riders. The stranger stood beside him, her pistol ready. "They're closer than we thought," she said. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the hills. "Then we don't wait." The old man handed him a lantern. "Whatever happens, I hope you know what you're doing." "I never do," he said quietly. "I just know what's right." The people of Red River began to move, boarding up windows, loading rifles, and leading their children to safety. The traveler and the stranger took position near the edge of town, where the road curved into the open plain. From the distance came the glint of lanterns, a long line of them moving like a snake through the night. The girl's voice carried faintly from behind. "Are they the bad men?" "Yes," the traveler said. "Will you stop them?" He didn't answer right away. His hand rested on the worn handle of his revolver. "I'll try," he said. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint sound of hooves and wheels. The sky above Red River turned dark as iron. The stranger looked at him, her face pale but determined. "This is it," she whispered. He met her eyes, and for a moment there was no guilt, no past-only resolve. "Then we stand." The first light of approaching lanterns touched at the edge of the road. The valley held its breath once more, waiting for the storm to break. The line of lanterns came closer until their light painted the plain in a trembling orange hue. Rain clouds hung above, swollen and heavy, there, edges lit faintly by the moon. Red River stood silent except for the soft creak of shutters and the shifting of boots on the wet ground. The traveler stood at the front, his coat dripping, revolver in hand. The stranger was beside him, calm but watchful. Around them, townsfolk waited in the dark, their faces tight with fear and defiance. No one spoke. The air itself felt alive, charged with the quiet strength of people who had lost too much already. When the riders finally came into view, They moved in a straight line, the company's insignia clear on their coats. At their head rode Harlan, his face shadowed under the brim of his hat. He raised a hand, and the wagons behind him stopped. "This doesn't have to end badly," he called out, his voice carrying across the wet ground. "Lay down your weapons, hand over the doctor, and we'll let the rest of you stay." The traveler stepped forward, rain dripping from his hat. "We've seen what your mercy looks like." Clearwater burned under it. Harlan's jaw tightened. That town resisted progress. Red River doesn't have to. Progress, the traveler said, his voice steady, isn't worth the ashes it leaves behind. The silence stretched between them. The storm broke again, thunder rolling through the valley as the first drops began to fall. Behind the traveler, the old man from the saloon cocked his rifle, the sound sharp in the quiet. "You heard him," the old man said. "We're done bowing to men who take more than they give." A single gunshot cracked the air, fired from somewhere in the line of riders. It missed its mark, hitting the mud near the traveler's feet. The moment of hesitation vanished. Red River answered back with a roar of defiance. The night lit up with muzzle flashes as the townsfolk fought not for gold or land, but for the right to remain. The traveler moved through the chaos with sharp precision, keeping low, guiding the townspeople where he could. Harlan's men advanced, but the rain turned the ground slick, and visibility dropped fast. The stranger fired from the doorway of the blacksmith's shop, covering those who moved the wounded to safety. Lanterns shattered, smoke and rain mixing into a heavy haze that made the world seem unreal. Through it all, the traveler kept his eyes on Harlan. He spotted him near the center, shouting orders, his voice rising above the noise. The traveler moved closer, weaving between wagons and broken barrels. When he finally reached a clearing near the well, they came face to face. "This is what you wanted," Harlan shouted, his revolver raised. "You think this town will survive when the company sends more men?" The traveler stared back at him. "Maybe not, but at least they'll remember someone stood up." Both men fired almost at once. Harlan staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his revolver dropping into the mud. The traveler lowered his weapon, breathing hard, rain streaming down his face. Around them, the fighting had begun to fade. The company men were retreating, their wagons turning back toward the valley. When it was finally quiet, the townsfolk emerged from cover. The fire that had started near the edge of town hissed out in the rain. The stranger walked toward the traveler, her clothes torn, face streaked with mud and rain. "It's over," she said softly. He shook his head. "For now, they'll come again. Then we'll be ready," she replied. Harlan was still alive, lying near the well. The traveler approached him slowly, his boots sinking into the wet ground. Harlan looked up, his expression bitter but tired. "You think you've changed anything," he muttered. "There's always another man behind me, another plan, maybe," the traveler said quietly. "But you won't be part of it." He turned away as the old man and two others came to bind Harlan's wound and keep him under watch. They didn't kill him. The traveler wouldn't allow it. Some things, he believed, had to end differently. By morning, the rain had washed the blood and smoke from the streets. The sky was clear, a pale blue stretched wide over the valley. The people of Red River gathered near the well where the traveler stood with the stranger. The old man handed back the maps, now wet and crumpled but still legible. "What'll you do with these?" he asked. "Take them east," the traveler said. "Show the world what's really happening out here." The stranger looked at him, surprised. "You're leaving?" He nodded slowly. "Someone has to tell the story. If the truth dies here, the next town won't stand a chance." The little girl who had watched from the saloon steps ran up to him, holding a piece of cloth. "You dropped this," she said. It was the bandana he had used to cover his arm. He smiled faintly. "Keep it, for luck." She frowned. "You'll need it more." "Maybe," he said, crouching to meet her eyes. "But I think Red River's luck just started." He mounted his horse as the town watched. The stranger looked at him, the wind tugging at her hair. "You'll come back?" she asked. "When the time's right," he said. "But you don't need me now." She gave a small, knowing smile. "You're wrong about that." He said nothing more, only tipped his hat and turned toward the open road. The sun climbed higher, lighting the wet roofs and the hills beyond. The sound of his horse's hooves faded until it was swallowed by the whisper of the wind. For days after, Red River began to rebuild. The people repaired what they could and buried what they had to. They didn't talk much about the night of the storm, though everyone remembered it in their own way. The stranger helped organize the papers the traveler left behind, making copies, sending them east through the old courier routes. Within weeks, whispers started spreading beyond the valley, stories of burned towns, secret maps, and one man who stood against the Red Iron Company. Harlan's men never returned. Word came later that the company had started pulling out of several smaller settlements. Pressured by what the papers called moral outrage, the truth had done what bullets couldn't. One evening, the stranger walked to the ridge above Red River. The valley below glowed with lantern light, quiet and alive again. She thought of the traveler and how he had vanished into the horizon with only his horse and his silence. She didn't know where he had gone, but part of her believed he was still somewhere west, finding other towns, warning others before it was too late. The old man joined her, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Thinking about him?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Always," he nodded. "Some folks are meant to wander, others are meant to remember." They stood there for a while, the breeze carrying the scent of pine and earth. The scars on the land would heal, as they always did, but something had changed forever. The people of Red River had found their voice, and no company or army could silence it again. That night, as the last light faded, the stranger lit a single lantern and set it by the window of the saloon. "It was a signal," she said, "for anyone still lost in the dark, anyone still running. A promise that Red River would not turn away those seeking truth." Far beyond the valley, on a narrow trail cutting through the mountains, the traveler rode beneath the stars. His arm still ached where the bullet had grazed him, but his spirit was steady. In the saddlebag beside him were new letters, signed testimonies from miners and settlers who had joined the cause. The fight wasn't over, it had only changed shape. He looked once more toward the east, where the faint glow of dawn touched the horizon. "Keep the fire," he murmured, as if speaking to the valley miles behind him. The horse moved forward, slow and sure, through the open silence of the high plains. The traveler didn't know what lay ahead, only that the truth was worth carrying, even when the weight grew heavy. By the time the first light of morning broke fully across the sky, the valley behind him was nothing but a line of gold and shadow. Red River lived on, strong and unbroken, a quiet reminder that even in the darkest corners of the world, courage could still take root and grow. The story of the traveler became a tale passed between camps and towns, told in low voices by men around fires and mothers to their children before bed. They said he rode for justice, that he never stayed long, and that wherever he went, people stood a little taller. Maybe that was true, or maybe it was just a way to keep hope alive. Either way, the world changed, not with noise or glory, but with the steady hands of those who refused to surrender. And though the road stretched on without end, it carried with it the quiet truth that sometimes one voice, one stand, and one choice could turn the tide of a whole valley.